All right. Well, first of all, um, we began this day talking or communicating with your friend whom we speak, and we began by explaining the idea to see how it would resound within him. The idea that Mary, whom you've been working with quite a bit, of course, is actually an illusion, and wasn't a very uh, fond kind of response to this. And in many ways, it's very important to be able to understand what this means if you're going to try to understand not just the idea of the healing of the emotional body, but the extreme example in sorcery of erasing personal history. Because it's not meant as something symbolic in our perception, it's not meant as something figurative, it's meant quite literally. And it's something that, in our perception, is of course therefore very helpful in terms of the mystical death process. You have a situation in which you're so profoundly rooted into various systems of understanding the world around you, working systems of consciousness and so on, that it's very difficult, very challenging to move you beyond that as a people, and that's understandable. Mary, the energy, the light and energy of the God force that you recognize and interact with as Mary, other beings, other parts of the universes and so on, experience in different ways. Some of those beings will experience that energy quite exactly the way you are in terms of the parameters of the working of that energy, and other beings will perceive that as a part of other energies as well, and more of a conglomeration of energies. The energies that emanate from what we call the God force, of course, simply work through all the creation cycles, and the ways that the peoples interpret these energies, these lights and energies, these realms of consciousness or configurations of consciousness and feeling and so forth and divine light, are all really created and determined in the relationship between the peoples and the heavenly realms. And of course, one of the things, excuses that happens is that usually the communication from the heavenly realms is rather limited. It's more of a brief period of your time space, and then your peoples spend an extraordinary amount of time going through this over and over again and getting new ideas, new philosophies, new ideologies about what other peoples perceived to take place. And of course, the only truth of the matter is, the only thing that's absolutely and profoundly true is that which you can be able to experience and tap into, or experience yourself as a part of, in this very moment. And the rest of it is already into the realm of illusion. When you're trying to erase personal history, one of the things that you are trying to do in our perception is recognize that all of the ways that you, through your different life expressions, and the other beings through their life expressions, all the ways that your people, therefore, have attempted to express who they are and create interrelationships into the world around them, are usually, and when we say usually, by far usually, based upon premises of illusion. And that illusion, of course, begins with self. If you can erase the illusion of self, then you will watch all these other illusions completely change. And we're not telling you that if you can erase the illusion of self, that all illusion will be gone, but all that you perceive, all of your understanding of the worlds around you will change considerably. And what it does is it reconfigures what your relationship is within the scheme of things. This is one of the reasons why, when you began your training, we felt it was important to talk about your soul light and energy in a kind of functional mode within the scheme of things. You know, if you notice, we did really try not to just spend a lot of time trying to describe to you what you look like, what your life experiences are like, to create a sense of an ego structure in the space of soul origin. That's a very dangerous thing to do, because what it does is it creates a sense of ego into a space where ego is not even functional. So what it then does is keep you ever so distant from the very truth, the very heart of who you are, of your being. So, when you go back to this, for example, if you can understand then that your soul root plays a given function within the scheme of things, what you recognize when you take self out of it is that there is a continuous and glorious interplay and spectrum of light and energies, all emanating from the space of the God force that fill through this, emanating through the space of the kingdom, that fill all of creation. What maintains the intended balances and harmony structures and so forth are the interplays that are already established in the different natures of the soul root origin. So, in other words, if you have a being whose nature on the soul root origin is to be, let's say, a preserver of the eternal flame from the space of the kingdom in the realm of the angelic and the Holy of Holies, that individual can begin to understand and explore themselves not in terms of meaning that they cultivate for who they are based upon all that they feel they've done through the different life expressions and so on, getting this great composite sense of self. But hopefully, in the end, they will recognize that that function within the scheme of things is probably, in our perception, the most specific reference that really should be made in terms of defining who that person is. Now, that doesn't define if they're a good or a bad person. It doesn't tell you if they're highly evolved or not highly evolved. It doesn't judge, it doesn't qualify. It simply states, we would call it a fact, but it simply states the relationship that their vital energies have within the scheme of things to the God force and then throughout creation. And that is all. Now, that definition is not self-containing. In other words, just because we say that about a person or being on a soul root level doesn't mean that they're not capable of a very wide range of activities, of affectations from a soul root level. It simply means that the primary impulse of their soul energies is to uphold this given function. The way that the more the life expressions are able to realign in harmony and work in relationship with their soul root light and energy, will determine, the more they can do that, the more the wider the spectrum of their influence and affectation from the soul root level. So in other words, you, from a life expression, can expand and strengthen the role of your soul root within the scheme of things, or you can debilitate it in many ways. You can make it much more difficult. It's a decision of each soul, in terms of the consciousness decision making on the life expression mode as well as the soul root level. This is one of the reasons why we've always said that if you take an individual who has had very, very destructive life expressions, causing great harm and suffering to others, this is of enormous, we'll call it pain or burden and sorrow on a soul root level, because what it means is that it takes that soul root operating with a function in the scheme of things and makes it very difficult for it to be able to uphold that, because the resonance patterns are so fragmented and actually heated, for lack of a better way of putting it, that there's a friction that takes place. If there's a friction between the life expression and the soul root level, what are you talking about? You're talking about an inherent polarity. If you create polarization between a life expression and the soul root of that life expression, what do you have? You have an individual cut off from the very source of their evolving and their well-being. There's an enormous tragedy. The sorcerer, interestingly enough, is able to achieve a much, much, much wider range of workings if they can actually erase personal history. Because first of all of the thoughts, all of the ideas that you have held in terms of what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, what it means to be a human being, what the way you've learned to see and relate to the world around you, have the potential to be very, very profoundly changed. The key in our perception is not to get to a point where, not to have to wait until you get to a point where you have worked through the emotional bodies of all your life expressions and all aspects of your life growing up in this realm, in this incarnation, so that you can then erase personal history. That's not the point. Because if you had to wait to do that, it would really be a very, very long and arduous journey. The key to erasing personal history is to be able to recognize what is true, what is truth, what is resonant truth for your being in this moment and what is not. And continually bringing back to yourself the spaces energetically of truth, and continuously when you can see that which is illusion truly in your heart and your mind as illusion, you don't have to force it away. Your relationship with that information or with those ideas or conceptions changes dramatically. And you have a kind of a domino principle. You started with one aspect of personal history and it begins to affect others. And there is a resonance pattern that's established that will keep on bringing up all the different aspects that attach to any given system of self-understanding that you've cultivated in this life expression. Now, when you look at the world around you, something very important is necessary. You need to be able to realize that life is never, ever static. It is always flowing in a continual motion. If that life is never static, then what it means is that when you say that you want to follow the Tao or be part of the watercourse way, it's not as if you are some sort of like a boat that you put on your watercourse way and the watercourse way takes you. The real key to understand this is to understand that you are the watercourse way. You are an inseparable part of it. Your configuration and reconfiguration, moment by moment, of energy, of light and energy, is what maintains what you experience as a physical formation. But as you understand, and even your science and your physics understand, that's an illusion. You understand the idea that solid matter really is an illusion. You can talk about denser or lighter energy structures, that's fine. What's one of the things that makes the human energy structure so dense at times? The emotional body. It's not that it's always meant to be. Now obviously there's a different density no matter what the emotional body is of a human being to a leaf on a tree. But the key is there's one and only one watercourse way. There's one and only one Tao. It might change forms. It might seem very different to you at different times. But there's only one. And it's that which emanates from what we would call the God Force. Now, if you are a part of this watercourse way, one of the things that you need to then recognize is that the consciousness that flows through that watercourse way that you find yourself a part of in this realm of life forms on your planet, that consciousness is actually, once again, an illusion in terms of not being yours. So we've talked about this before, the idea being that your thoughts are not your consciousness held within this spectrum of your physical form. It's all a magnificent orchestration of resonance patterns. And something is very interesting to note. As you grow up, every time you say I, every time you use the signature of your name, every time someone else refers to you and someone, they always bring you back to a given reference point energetically. You're in third grade and the teacher calls on you as an individual and you haven't done your homework. Well, what is wrong with you? Why didn't you do your homework? How are you going to be punished? How are you, for example, let's say you're punished by a failing grade. How are you going to carry? You're going to carry the weight of your failing grade because you forgot to do or didn't desire to do your assignment. Think of that, because the key, the reason we say that as an example is think about all the times, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times that the same reference point is tapped into. The key is, and the tragedy is, that that reference point is inseparably attached then to your name, to your signature. If you ever want to free your signature of all that has been attached to it by your experiences in the world around you, you must erase personal history. You cannot say, I want to get rid of those experiences that I had in school because they were very unpleasant, but I want to hold on to the ones that I had at home with this loved one or that loved one because those I love, those I want to cherish. The courage of the sorcerer is to be able to say, once and for all, no more. No more illusion. That signature that has been utilized and created to be able to define my configuration of light and energy through this incarnation is going to be cleansed and cleared once and for all. If you can do that, the ways in which you free yourself are so extraordinary, it'd be very difficult to even go through all the ways within this class situation. Because first of all, one of the things that you will have done is you will have allowed, finally, all that you have attached your definitions of who you are, what you're capable of, what you're not capable of, and so on, your worth, who you really are connected with, who you're not connected with. You can go on and on. You take all of that and you have the courage to surrender that to one principle and one principle alone, and that is the principle of absolute unconditional love. That's all. Now that doesn't mean that the next morning you're going to wake up and look in the mirror and not remember anything of who you are. What it means is you will no longer attach to that illusion. People who are trying to affect you one way or the other will have a much more difficult time if, when they keep on conjuring your signature of your naming and so on, if they cannot attach to vital energies of who you are. The way that you are, can allow this not to happen, for them not to attach to vital energies of who you are, is to erase that personal history and have one and one truth remain, that you are a child of God, period. And then what you begin to do is each day you determine what you're going to attach to the self, to the I. Now, obviously, you can imagine if you're a monk and in a cloistered environment, this would be much easier than exercise. It's much more difficult when you're going into the world around you. People address you in way and manners that they've cultivated in knowing you. You go into the workplace and so on. The key is to be able to not obstruct the game of life. You're not helping the people about you if you challenge every person you meet and say, I am no longer who you thought I was. I am no longer constrained against the Tao. I am with the Tao and I am purely an illusion. These kinds of statements aren't going to get you very far at all. They'll make it very difficult, and they don't really achieve anything in terms of any sincere goal. The key to all of this is for you to begin to understand, in our perception, that from this moment on, you hold within your grasp the power to not just cleanse and shed of who you are, and that emotional body of self, but to very specifically determine how you're going to recreate it. Now, at this point, we'd like to ask very briefly if there are any questions.
I don't know if I have any questions, but I have, I guess, some comments, and
All right.
then maybe you could tell me if this is. I think I've heard, all is an illusion for years,
Yes.
for a long time.
Yes.
But I think I've only begun to really, really understand it several months ago. And what has started to happen lately, really just recently, is that that concept is kind of with me during the day. And I noticed that, for instance, something that would bother me, if I just think in terms of everything's an illusion, it doesn't. And I see, and again, I don't know if this, I think I mentioned this before, but I had that experience of stepping outside the universe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And seeing my whole universe, the way I perceive the earth and everything else,
Yes.
As really a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of it, and my being has stepped outside. I mean, I am outside of that in a way, yet I'm within it. The illusion is within it, but my being is outside of the illusion. And I can see, I don't know if this is right. I would really appreciate some comments on this.
Yes.
But it's like your being, you talked about
Yes.
your soul root and who you really are,
Yes.
has set up this hologram
Yes.
for learning, for evolving.
Yes.
So what I'm seeing is my life expressions, including this one and everything that, and obviously I'm much more in touch with the details of this one. Everything is a lesson I've chosen to teach myself for the evolvement of my soul root. So I see things that, just daily living, and everything that goes on and all the learning as part of an evolving of the soul root.
That's very good. This is something we'd like to add, though, very quickly, if we may. It's a bit of a difficult concept. But do you know when we're saying, as everyone keeps on saying you, and
Mm-hmm.
you did this, and so on and so forth, and referring to that. One of the things that we believe that you'll find is you say that in terms of creating holographically life expression to learn certain things and so on. In many ways, an individual, remember this, the danger of consciousness is that you cannot take consciousness from the way it's experienced in the earth plane and make it safe, for the people, strip it of its inherent power and so on. You really can't do it. The peoples have the ability, we're not telling this is consciously even understood, but they have the ability. You're basically, part of the sea, this watercourse way. They have the ability to align with you, and if you are able to if they can get you to turn your attention back to them, to create that kind of reciprocal flow of light and energy,
Mm-hmm.
they can create you to be whatever they need you to be for their own lessons and so on.
Oh dear.
You see, there's no such, there's no safety mechanism in there to stop that from happening, because it's purely a game of perception and illusion. Now the key is not to go through your life experiences with blinders on, afraid then to even be able to make a contact with another being. The key is this: if you've erased your personal history, that individual can no longer achieve this. And the reason that they can't achieve it is the very reason that they could achieve it in the first place, which is that you have been trained and born into a given reality, a given perception of what is, that you share with them. That is the key. If you can fully and completely remove yourself from that shared consciousness, it's that consciousness, it's the web of that shared collective consciousness of the people that gives those people such a powerful hold over you. Now notice this, we're not talking about just people from your country even. You could have people from mainland China or something like that, very far away, very removed from your particular culture. It doesn't make a difference if you are still perceiving. Now their experience of life and way of looking at life is not necessarily going to be exactly the same, but there is a given fabric of the web, of the working of the web, of consciousness that is inherent for the human being in this stage of its evolution on this planet. You either are hooking into that, linking up to that, or you're not. If you're not linking up to that, you have to be linking up to something. That's why it's so pervasive. That's why it's so inherent in all the peoples of your planet, or most of the peoples of your planet. Because consciousness was never created to function independently. It's part of a moving fabric of life. And you're always going to hook into and resonate to that which comes from the space of your incarnation, most readily. Now when you first are incarnating, you may carry all different consciousness attributes and so forth, but they are usually systematically challenged and shed from that individual during the time of infancy. So you're being trained to be able to, when you hook up into even the language of a people is inseparable from their consciousness. We're not saying it's the only way, but one of the most fascinating and courageous manners of gaining a sovereignty over this kind of a situation is the erasing of personal history. So it's not something that you simply want to do as a sorcerer because you don't want to have a difficult emotional body. Now the sorcerer doesn't want to have a difficult emotional body, so that would be a valid reason, but that's only the beginning. There's much, much more at stake. And the real challenging part of this is that if you're not hooking up into that collective consciousness, what is to stop the individual from hooking up into changing the hookup to the consciousness of the Godhead emanating through the God force? Nothing to stop them, because you as peoples were never intended to be forced away from that. That's your heritage. That is the truth of who you are. And that is the truth that you will eventually return back to. So for this class, what we wanted you to be able to do is practice this. And the way we wanted you to practice this is to see yourselves not simply as three people trying to erase their personal histories, period, but three peoples who are in training to become sorcerers, who recognize that if you want to be able to erase your own personal history, you must be able to see, feel, and experience how all the peoples about you create their personal histories. Because what they've created as their personal histories are inseparable from your personal histories. You're far more connected than you could ever imagine, even if you were cloistered as a monk or nun and so forth. Very simple, that's really the basic assignment. And the key, of course, is to continuously see what happens in terms of the more you can shed of that personal history. Now, before we even finish that thought, when we say that, in other words, watch the interplay between the personal history and the emotional body, keeping in mind that the emotional body is your path of energy, which is meant to be an empowering path of energy, not a debilitating path of energy, to the imprinting for your life expression maintained holographically in the etheric. Your DNA, as Daniel was talking the other day to your friend when we speak about, that patterning of your DNA is created and recreated consistently and continuously through this, we'll call it this, the physical etheric interface grid. And luckily, it is created in its basic inception at the birthing. Really, actually, it begins with what we call the inception, and through the birthing process.
This is the emotional body you're talking about.
No, we're talking about that grid within etheric that then creates and recreates the DNA structure. That's already created really at the time of conception. And luckily so, because it's much purer that way. If it had to be created in a latter stage, such as after the point of birth and so on, it'd be very, very sad. Very, very difficult for your peoples. So, what usually is happening is that those patterns are becoming obscured in their resonance, in the interface resonance, because of this emotional body. Now, the more you're able to achieve the fulfillment of erasing personal history, you will begin to find that which you experience as the emotional body of energy was created to be your key to absolute mastery. If you wanted to be able to really master, as Daniel has been saying recently, that sort of biocomputer concept that we've been working with in the spiritual, within the astral, the key to you learning how to do that, and what makes it still challenging for you to have to, what you have to go over as a hurdle in that exercise of that last class to be able to get to work and function with that, is that space of that emotional body of energy. When that can be changed to work for you, you have in your midst one of the most extraordinary tools that you could ever master into the collective keyboard system or computer type system of consciousness contained within your life. But it's been continuously interfered with and obscured and to extraordinary degrees, really, when you think about what it's capable of achieving. So try to experience also what the emotional body of energy could really be for you if it wasn't your obstacle, but was actually your tool. And lastly, what we would say is try to explore then how you, because Because remember, we didn't give your film to whom we speak a great deal of challenge in making the tape, because the main concern that we offered is that the music for the ritual align with all of the aspects of self and personal history that affects the emotional body of a people, and also gives the greater definition to who they are in terms of their hopes, their aspirations, their longings. These are the things that are going to be the continual energies tugging and reclaiming that sense of self. And remember that the individual, no matter what you might read in some of your books, the individual who erases personal history doesn't end up in some kind of a very cold, austere environment of living. It's filled with the greatest warmth you can imagine. It's the warmth of the untampered, ever so present and glorious, unconditional love of the God force. And that cannot be topped. And it then becomes something that you can radiate in extraordinary gestures to the world all around you. All right? Your guides for the ritual are not going to be too many. You're going to work with your guides for your mystical death process, and for those that have the guides for the sorcery training. What we would say is that since Moria and your friend whom we speak had both aligned with Hermes Trismegistus in the sorcery training, that if it's all right with Daniel, we would also like to align him for this, at least for this ritual, with Hermes Trismegistus in that respect. Is that all right?
Thank you.
All right, good. Other than that, you will be working with Yeshua unto the Christ as one, Saint Michael, and that's all. But remember, this is a ritual in which you don't want to remain distant, interesting from your conversation beginning, you don't want to remain distant from the heart of your own feelings, or from the deeper feelings of the world around you. Don't fear empathy, or the empathetic response. Learn to see the inherent empowerment in that process of empathy. Because if you align with the very hearts of the peoples all throughout your culture, you reconnect into the greater Tao of which you are inseparably a part. And as you shed for yourself, you will affect the others. I'd like to thank you all very much and hope you have a very, very beautiful ritual.
Thank you.